Hey, what's good, family? Welcome to today's video. First, I just want to apologize for this being a couple of days late. There's been a lot of crazy news and things that have been happening in my life as of the last week or so. Yeah, and then Friday I actually went to upload this video and I realized that I recorded my vocals only on the left channel, and I was like, well, I can't upload that. So here we are doing this again for the third time, and hopefully the third time is the charm. So today's video is going to be covering frequency splitting regarding using only Falcon. And here's the sound that I have for you all today. So there's some neat twisting features in there that when you bounce this out to a sample is going to be highlighted. However, since it's still in its MIDI form, then you're going to see that the pitch bending and all that isn't going to be quite as prominent. But I had a challenge from one of my viewers by the name of this guy, and he specifically requested that I make a neurobase with only Falcon doing frequency splitting within Falcon. And at first I was like, why would I do this? But it actually turned out to be a pretty fun project that yielded some decent results. The only trouble that I had with making this patch is that I had to kind of reverse engineer this as opposed to how I would have liked. So on my left, you can kind of see that I have 3 different channels on this, where I would have liked to just have had one instance of an output and then send 3 different auxiliary things. But for some reason, whenever I try to send something to a bus or to an auxiliary, it doesn't really work out. So I don't know if Falcon has a bug or if I need to go back and read the manual, but if you have an answer to that question, then that would have made this video a lot easier. So with that being said, we can just go ahead and dive right into the patch. And as I said before, nothing has any external processing on it. It's literally everything within Falcon. It's kind of funny because right now everyone's talking about the kilohertz synth, and then Massive X just dropped. But really, I think that Falcon is something that people are overlooking, especially when talking about like an all-in-one synth. The only thing that Falcon doesn't really have as far as like a key feature is the fact that it doesn't have a multiple matrix FM synthesis capability. But other than that, the fact that it has like over 80 effects built in and the types of synthesis that it has in its own right is pretty unique compared to other synths. This thing is a monster, man. And one more thing that you should notice is when I play this, this is a super complex patch, and my CPU is only hitting at about 11%. So, I don't know. Take that, sound design snobs. That would be me. Okay, so here's the patch. Let's go ahead and start over in the edit function. And what I've done here is started with our fundamental and built a saw stack with a sine as a base. Again, as I'd like to say, I normally would have just liked to use one instance of this. What I've ended up having to do was take this, tweak it to my liking, and then copy it to a second and third channel. And all you have to do that is just right click and then go to duplicate part. Within all of these, they all have basically the same oscillators, and it's basically 3 instances of that with different processing in between. You can, man, there's like a lot of stuff that you can do, but basically I've just tweaked the cents on these, 25 up, 25 down, and then the the sine is kind of whatever. And then I've gone into the effects tab on each section and done my processing there. So the EQ starts out with kind of the frequency split, and it's not necessarily ideal because you do get some crossover from each sound, but at the same time it's workable. And especially like in the highs and the mids, it's kind of, you can get away with it because phase cancellation doesn't really matter in that field as far as like mid-range basses. But I'll cover more of that here in a second. So on this tab, I have a high pass filter that's brick walled as high as it can go with a 96 pole. That's at about, that's at about 3.47K. There's some flanging happening. There's some distortion that's going on. And then I want to talk about these filters and the fact that Falcon has like unlimited LFOs. The digital filter is freaking neat because as you can see, the bandwidth can be opened and closed, and then you can also move, so you can get some really complex movement just off of a single filter, because technically what you're doing with this is essentially creating a low pass and then a high pass. I mean, it's still technically a notch, but you can see that separating that frequency in between and letting that being automated creates a neat movement within that. So yeah, that's something that you'll see as a common feature between all of these. And that's pretty much it for the highs. On here, we have our mids, and there's a cool little feature that we're doing, which is we are messing with the transposition. And what you'll see is not necessarily with these two poles moving, but you'll see that the sound itself is being moved up and down the frequency spectrum. So I'm kind of using this EQ as a filter in its own right, sort of like a really wide bandpass, and that's being automated via here. And if you want to add something to as an LFO, you just go to add modulation program and then new any of these, which is pretty cool. So the cutoff on the high end here should be pretty close to like where I cut off on the high end on the high top is where I'm going to cut off here, maybe a little bit less. And then where I cut off here, I'm going to do the same thing on the low. And that's kind of how I do the frequency split in general. Then we have some wave shaping. I'm just kind of driving the amount just a little bit. It's not really doing a whole lot. It's just making it a little bit meaner. And then the filtering section is kind of the same. On this one, I tend to have a bandpass that's automating the bandwidth and the frequency. And then I'm doing that same thing again, except with the notch. Then I think the last thing I have, oh, maybe not. I have a chorus on this, which is considered to be a chorus. This is pretty amazing, actually. It has a really high quality sound to it. And I think that if you kind of use it if you use it sparingly, then it's going to enhance your sound and not make it sound too washed out. But this is a pretty neat effect in general. The last thing that we have is some more distortion, and that kind of just tops out that mid-range. And as you can see, for the most part, like this processing is going to be the most towards the middle. There is some more that I'll get to later when we get to the mixer section, but let's just kind of keep going. In our low section, we don't really have a lot happening. So I'm cutting off the super lows, and then the cutoff is at that 150 hertz, just to kind of keep that sub consistent, as you hear me say a lot. There's a little bit of saturation, just a tiny bit. That's 2.87%. It does make a slight difference, but it's a very slight difference, and you can kind of pump this up if you want a little bit more sub. And then finally, this is just a stereo placement, so I'm turning down the width. Something that I've been experimenting with is not necessarily just driving the sub in complete mono. Having just a little bit of stereo might actually end up being okay, but that's just, again, something that I'm experimenting with. Of course, if you're like, yo, your sub needs to be in total mono, then just take the width and turn it all the way down. So finally, we have a couple of more effects on our mid section here. And it's weird because on our main, you can add effects in these parts, and then over the whole underlying thing during these like sections on this breakout, you can also add effects on top of that. So like there's so many different places that you can put effects. And if you have any questions about this, then please feel free to reach out. But Falcon is kind of complicated in its own right with the way that it does routing. So yeah, I have another bandpass filter right here that is automating, doing the same thing that I've always been doing since this patch. There's a little bit of drive happening. That's just about 10%. And then I'm doing another filter section here that's just doing the frequency sweep. So as you can tell, the most prominent stuff that's happening is in our mid band. And then finally on the master, we have our multi-band compression. That's just doing a little bit of, well, compression on each one, just a little bit. And then we have a digital EQ that is kind of shaping the overall tone to make sure that everything is clean. While this patch in its own right may not be doing super twisty, crazy sounding in its own right, whenever we bounce this out to audio, we'll be able to transform this into something that can be more usable. So here is a bounced out audio form. And we can go into a sampler if you like and mess with our transposition. Hold on, let me make sure the volume is okay. All right, and if I were to play some notes, we get some cool sounding things. Which is okay, but this wouldn't be a true to the series tutorial if we didn't use Falcon again for the same purpose. So what I've done is gone into Falcon, created a separate instance, gone into our main, our edit, and you can basically just drop in a multi-granular, go into here, take this audio file and drag that in. Wait, where'd it go? And then you can basically start tweaking knobs and stuff from here where it gets really fun. So I'll just kind of play some stuff and mess around and you'll see what I mean. That's just kind of a small example about how deep that rabbit hole goes. But once you have a neat sound, and you can honestly, like, you don't even need to have a respace to kind of get these kinds of tones, but you can see that there is so much more that you can do after you go into the patch or after you get into the synthesis part. And the neat thing that just blows my mind that I'm not going to really cover is that you can go in and start adding more effects, and you can do frequency splitting again if you so choose, although I wouldn't recommend it when you're doing this stage. You can if you want to, but yeah, so if you want to do more filtering, you want to add more distortion or more effects and all that, you can continue to do that all within the means of Falcon. And I mean, I don't know what to tell you. This is one of the best synths that's ever come out, just for the sheer fact that it is so powerful. Again, the only thing that I wish is that it were a little bit easier to do frequency splitting with, or I'm sure that there's something that I'm missing because I went the really long way. So in regards to whether it can or can't be done isn't really the question. It's more of a means of should you do it within Falcon? And the answer is it's kind of up to you and it depends on your workflow. For me personally, I think it's a lot easier to record all of the stuff out and do it in the means of Ableton's processing. But if you don't have Ableton, like some of my viewers, then sometimes that's not necessarily an option. However, one more thing that I'd like to cover is that if you are trying to do frequency splitting by means of busing, then you would basically send the audio to a bus, or in this case a return channel, and create multiple copies of it and do there. So if I go down here, I'd go to insert return channel, and then I would just send it to here so that the output is going to the return. And ideally, this should be going to sends only, I want to say. There we go. And that should be on A. Oh, that's because it's turned off. There we go. And go to sends only. Then what that basically means is that, sorry, it's been a long time since I've used a return track, but what I've done is this basically is only going towards the return channel. So if I were to turn this down and stop sending, then it would be completely silent. So you would create 3 instances of this and then do your low, mid, high, or however many you want to do. And then for every return channel you have, you would just send it out this way. And it's cool because you can automate the volume in between those. And that, how I just did, is pretty much how busing and sends work in just about any DAW. So if you don't have Falcon, then you can do it that way. If you don't have Ableton, then you can achieve that this way. And yeah, there's so many ways to solve this issue. Anyways, that's the patch, guys, and I hope that this was informative and you learned something. Again, sorry for the late post, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Go get yourself Falcon, go mess with it and dive into it. It's super fun, and happy producing.
Recording to